One narrow waterway tightens, and suddenly the cost of daily life rises far beyond the front line. Not first in speeches and not first on maps, but in fuel, freight, flights, food, and the fear that grows when trade routes no longer feel secure. That is what makes this crisis so powerful. It does not stay inside one region because the systems tied to that region are woven into the wider world. The first shock hit energy markets almost at once. Brent crude pushed above $90 a barrel while traders feared disruption around a critical oil passage. That route is the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20 million barrels of oil move through it each day, close to 1/5 of global daily consumption. So when movement through that corridor is threatened, markets react fast. They begin pricing in shortage, delay, rerouting, and the risk that the next shipment may be harder to secure. That is why warnings of $100 oil or even $130 oil stop sounding extreme. In a tense environment, distant scenarios start looking possible enough to change decisions immediately. And once energy rises, the shock spreads fast. Transport becomes more expensive, industry absorbs more pressure, and inflation finds new ways to stay alive. For the Gulf states, the danger is not limited to security. It reaches into tourism, aviation, state budgets, investment plans, and public stability. Countries such as the UAE and Qatar depend heavily on being seen as open, connected, and reliable. When skies close and routes break, billions in revenue can disappear much faster than expected. Higher oil prices do not automatically solve that problem. A resource only strengthens a budget if it can be exported smoothly, insured properly, and delivered without constant disruption. That is where the pressure becomes political as well as economic. When exports become uncertain, the strain reaches far beyond company profits. Money meant for long-term growth can start moving toward urgent security instead. That is one of the quiet costs of a serious regional crisis. The pressure does not stop in the Gulf. Europe feels it through gas, industry, and household energy costs. When gas operations were disrupted, European prices rose sharply. That kind of move spreads outward into factories, transport networks, power costs, and consumer inflation. Then another layer starts forming. Fuel tightens, fertilizer becomes more expensive, and the pressure begins moving toward food prices. This is how a conflict linked to one strategic corridor can reach households far away from the region itself. Modern supply chains depend on uninterrupted motion. And when movement is interrupted, the consequences multiply. Cargo becomes more expensive, planning weakens, and small disruptions start stacking into larger economic stress. That is why analysts fear not only a temporary shock, but a broader slowdown. If energy stays high while growth weakens, the world can face inflation and recession risk at the same time. Financial markets sensed that danger quickly. Major indexes fell, and investors treated this as a global risk event, not a brief local flare-up. Then came the pressure on transit. Airspace closures across parts of the Middle East disrupted one of the world's most important aviation corridors. Thousands of daily flights were canceled as countries shut their skies and airlines scrambled to adjust. That affects not only tourists, but business travel, labor mobility, medical shipments, and electronics freight. Major airports in the region also faced damage. So this was not simply a case of planes taking a slightly longer route. It was a direct blow to infrastructure, scheduling, and confidence. And when confidence weakens in a major hub, the effect spreads quickly through connected networks. The human side turned harsh as well. Travelers stranded by closures faced extreme price increases, while urgent travel became a privilege for those who could pay the most. At sea, the disruption was just as serious. Major shipping firms began pulling vessels away from the most exposed lanes. Some ships were redirected around the Cape of Good Hope. That detour can add 10 to 15 days to Asia-Europe transit times, raising fuel use, labor costs, and scheduling pressure. Longer journeys create wider knock-on effects. Inventories get stretched, delivery promises weaken, and businesses lose room for error. Insurance becomes another battlefield of cost. War risk premiums can surge, and some insurers may decide the exposure is too high to cover it all. That matters more than many people realize. Trade does not move on ships and ports alone. It also moves on finance, legal certainty, insurance approval, and confidence in timing. Once enough of those pieces weaken, supply chains stop behaving like efficient systems. They start behaving like emergency workarounds. And once that happens, governments and companies move quickly to secure alternatives. One of the clearest responses came from India, which moved to secure large volumes of Russian crude. The transaction was not only about price. It was about keeping energy flows stable while traditional routes looked vulnerable. At the same time, the crisis accelerated the regional defense buildup. States were not only reacting to immediate events, they were preparing for a future that looks less predictable and more dangerous. Saudi Arabia moved in that direction through broad defense agreements with major domestic and international companies. The scale reflected a long-term push to expand readiness and strengthen local manufacturing capacity. Israel moved in a similar direction through the expansion of a major missile defense agreement with Germany. Again, the message is larger than one contract. Periods of tension do not only destroy value, they also redirect demand toward protection, surveillance, interception, and deterrence. That is one of the harsh truths of geopolitical stress. Even while some sectors lose routes, revenue, and stability, others gain urgency, funding, and strategic importance. So this crisis is not only about who controls territory or who answers whose strike. It is also about who can absorb disruption, reroute faster, and turn instability into leverage. And maybe the most unsettling part is this. The global system is not struggling because it is slow or broken by design. It is struggling because it is deeply optimized. A world built on speed and tightly linked supply chains works brilliantly in calm conditions. But when one choke point tightens, that same efficiency turns into exposure. The very design that creates low-cost movement in peace can create fast-rising vulnerability in crisis. That is why a conflict near one strategic corridor can reach so far, so fast. It touches energy, shipping, flights, food, finance, investment, and national planning, almost all at once. So the deepest question is not only who made the first move or who answers next. The deeper question is how long the world can absorb the rising cost of disruption before the route reopens, confidence returns, and pressure begins to ease. Follow for daily ideas and type in the comments, "Minute for Change."